It's Matt Slick Live, taking your calls at 877-207-2276. Here's Matt Slick.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Hey, let's get to Jan from North Carolina. Jan, welcome. You're on the air.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, I'm hanging in there.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, so the public school system is telling my children things about dinosaurs that I cannot square with the Bible. And I would like to know where the Bible falls on the dinosaurs and 65 million years ago they're wiped out, and just to have some correct information to perhaps give them.
Well, let me open up my science file, and then I'll get to the stuff in the Bible here in a second. Science is a philosophy, first of all. It's based on philosophical assumptions. And when you do that, you are inconsistent. And I'll just leave that for there. When it comes to dating methods,
with that totally, yes.
Yeah, it's a philosophy.
Yeah.
It is based on certain philosophical assumptions.
Science is a methodology, not a philosophy, though there is a philosophical basis for it, of course. While religious belief is just assumptions that are baseless or based on logical fallacies like question begging, arguments from ignorance and incredulity, and the argument from an erroneously assumed authority, which is another irrational assumption, we could fairly say that science is based on assumptions too, but that the assumptions of science are rational and thus defensible. These are the fundamental assumptions of science. One, that there are natural causes for things that happen in the world around us, and two, that evidence from the natural world can be used to learn about those causes. And those are hardly assumptions, are they? I mean, we can demonstrate those. The issue is that methodological naturalism, also known as the scientific method, demands that all postulations be testable, either verifiable or falsifiable or both. Scientific hypotheses can be tested meaningfully only if it is possible to identify some outcome that conflicts with the predictions. Because while believers want to make believe whatever they want to make believe simply because they want to believe it, regardless what the truth is, science wants to find out what the truth is, regardless of whatever we might have rather believed. So if you posit some idea, some potential explanation for whatever phenomenon, hey, maybe it's this, that's fine, but we need two things. One, there has to be some reason, meaning an actual fact, indicating whatever you're suggesting. Why do you think it's that? And two, while science has a rule that you can never prove anything to be true in the absolutely positive mathematical sense, there has to be some way to show if it's wrong, if it is. Because when we're doing science, then we're not believers. We're not just going to believe you. We're going to test what you have to say. It's a nice hypothesis you have there. It'd be a shame if someone were to test it. Then there's the assumption, and this one is an assumption, that there is consistency to the causes that operate in the natural world, meaning that the laws of physics don't arbitrarily change. In other words, 2 + 2 doesn't occasionally become 5 every third Saturday or leap year or whenever some god wants it to, because then the universe would be inconsistent and consequently unintelligible. There has to be some consistency if we are to understand anything at all. And taken together, these three are really one assumption that the universe can be studied and to some degree understood, which is the goal and purpose of science, to improve our understanding of the natural world. Because it is not possible to understand any hypothesized supernatural world. And Matt Slick just said that when you base anything on philosophical assumptions, even on these completely reasonable assumptions, then he says that you're being inconsistent. But that's wrong. Every interpretation of reality and our place in it is necessarily based on philosophical assumptions. Personally, I follow Hume in that, but nobody can avoid it. Matt Slick's own position is based on philosophical assumptions, except that his assumptions are indefensible nonsense, tantamount to insanity from my perspective. Because look at this list of three assumptions again. Slick is assuming the exact opposite in each case. He assumes, for no good reason, that there are supernatural causes, i.e. magic, literally, Though he won't call it that, it is what it is. Blessings and curses are both magical enchantments, and the Bible is full of incantations, sorcery, forecasting, transformation, transfiguration, alchemy, necromancy, exorcisms, and ritual spells involving elemental components or potions. So, yeah, supernatural effectively means magical. Then there's the second assumption, that evidence from the natural world can be used to learn about those causes. Slick has denied those to me directly when we were together on some podcast, and he told me that it didn't matter how much evidence there was disproving the flood or Exodus or whatever, because he said that I couldn't prove that I existed 2 weeks ago, because he suggested that, that God could have created everything last Thursday with fake ages and with all of us having false memories, because that's the kind of liar God that Matt believes in. The thing he failed to consider, though, is that if God had created everything last Thursday with all these fake memories and all of this, then the flood or the Exodus didn't happen in that reality either. So either way, I'm right, he's wrong. The flood never happened. The point is that evidence means nothing to Matt Slick. And then there's the last assumption, that there is consistency in the causes that operate in the natural world. He denies that one too, on the assumption that the laws of physics could arbitrarily change anytime his phony baloney faith feels threatened. Thus, his position is inconsistent, and he has just impugned the entire efficacy of science as a whole on the baseless assumption that his unwarranted and unreasonable assumptions are somehow better than the necessarily rational assumptions of science. But the scientific position is the only understanding of actual factual reality that has always been and still is consistent, as well as practically applicable and objectively verifiable and productive. Where Matt Slick's position is just philosophical nonsense that is baseless and useless and indefensibly inconsistent even internally. The truth is what the facts are. If you don't care what the facts are, then you don't care what the truth is. Matt Slick is going to demonstrate that for the entire rest of this video by repeating a bunch of lies that were already disproved decades ago. But he will not update or correct himself despite being way behind the times.
Now, the Bible does talk about dinosaurs.
No, it doesn't. I mean, technically it does, since the Bible mentions birds a few times, and birds are the last surviving lineage of dinosaurs, but otherwise, no. The Bible never mentions any other dinosaurs apart from birds, because the people who made up the fables in the Bible had no idea what a dinosaur is. And neither does Matt Slick, by the way, as you'll see in a moment.
There are, and I got to get the documentation for this, but there are cave drawings of dinosaurs in different parts of the world, which just demonstrates right there that dinosaurs and humans live together.
No, there are not any actual cave drawings of dinosaurs anywhere. There are a few poorly depicted images of birds and other things that wanna pretenders have mistaken for non-avian dinosaurs, but that's it. There are also a few hoaxes like the Peruvian Ica stones and fraudulently fabricated footprints in the Paluxy River and that sort of thing, where wanna pretenders create these fraudulent artifacts to encourage believers to believe. But there's nothing real or legitimate, such as Slick imagines. And most of these claims come down to misunderstanding poorly rendered artwork, like these long-necked animals way in the fuzzy background of the 16th century painting. Those are not sauropod dinosaurs. This is a painting of a caravan that was known to employ dromedary camels. Other situations arise when medieval European artists were trying to depict exotic animals that were vaguely described to them, but that the artist had never seen with their own eyes. And for more on that and for all of this associated silliness, I will include a video link below to a presentation I gave over a decade ago on Flintstones Archaeology, and another one covering more of the same that I gave years ago at DragonCon called Draxonomy. They both show the best and simultaneously most absurd examples of artwork supposedly depicting dinosaurs.
Now, as far as dating methods go, that's really important because, here we go, because they say these dinosaurs have to be millions and millions and millions and millions of years old. All right, they say that because they need evolution to be true.
No, we don't. Most of us would prefer if at least some, dinosaurs other than birds were still around, but Matt Slick isn't just wrong about that. He and other reality-denying religious extremists like him have a deep-seated emotional need for creationism to be true, even when they already know that it isn't and can't be. But they still have to pretend. They still have to make it out like it is. So he's trying to project his own dishonest biases onto us, and we will not share them. We don't need to have any particular conclusion turn out to be true. In fact, the best way to become rich and famous in science is to overturn the status quo by disproving some long-held notion. So, no. All we need is evidence to back your assertions. We cannot accept what you say just because you said it. We can't accept it until or unless you can show the truth of it. Show us that there is at least some truth to it, which is something religion has never done and never can do, but evolution does that all the time. The philosophy behind science is exactly opposite of the fallacious illogic that has maintained religious belief. Believers look for any excuse to make believe, and they will still believe even without it, while skeptics look for critical flaws in whatever the story is to disprove it if we can, because we don't want to be fooled into believing anything that is not evidently true. Where's the value in that? Only accurate information has practical application, so we only tentatively accept whatever is most strongly indicated by the best evidence and hasn't been discredited, like creationism already has been. We don't care what anyone believes. All that matters is what the facts are. And in this case, the fact is that even Christians among academic scientists of the Enlightenment age already knew that the Earth was definitely and demonstrably ancient, even a century before Darwin posted his the first working theory and mechanisms on evolution.
And for this
Right.
to be the case, then the Earth has to be old, and therefore that would justify long periods of time for evolution to work.
Matt Slick is still getting everything completely backwards. Lord Kelvin was one of Darwin's contemporaries, and he rejected Darwin's theory. Kelvin identified as an advocate of intelligent design, and he may be the first one to coin that phrase. But he still used his famous laws of thermodynamics to determine that the Earth had to be at least tens of millions of years old, without any reference to nor reverence for evolution. But then Kelvin learned about how the Earth generates its own radiation, and that forced him to push his estimates back much further, so that the Earth had to be exponentially older than even he initially thought it could be.
All right. Well, if that's the case, and they're 50, 60, 70, 80 million years old, then why are they finding soft tissue in bone marrow of dinosaurs in the bones?
Hmm.
And they
Right.
are. Okay.
Right.
Because they're not finding what you think they are. They haven't found any DNA or blood cells in dinosaur bones. What they did find was heme, an iron-based fossil remnant of blood, not blood itself. Otherwise, if the bone is thick, such that the interior of it is well insulated and buried deep for the same reason, then they have found microscopic amounts of some original organic material. But that has to be demineralized by resting for weeks in an acid bath to effectively unfossilize it for study. And I think it was the old Earth creationist Faz Rana who wrote of the surprising find that collagen can actually be reconstructed or reconstituted in a sense, such that it can last for an incredibly long time. But arguably more important is the point that Mary Schweitzer, the scientist who discovered dinosaur soft tissue, was a young Earth creationist when she went to work for that lab. But she quickly learned how to know that evolution is real and that the Earth is indeed ancient. I interviewed her on my channel last year, and I'll put a link to that below. She said that she had no idea how much scientists really knew to be true about evolution in deep time until she started working as a lab scientist herself and had to consider all the breadth of all that every day. I think she said it was only a matter of weeks before she realized that she was now an old Earth evolutionist. She still believes in God and all that, but she knows that evolution is real too. Her message to young Earth creationists is to stop citing her work as if it offers any support for young Earth, because it doesn't. So you should ask yourself, what is it that she knows that folks like Matt Slick don't know? Well, as we're about to see, Matt Slick doesn't know much. Not about this topic. Not at all.
It's a problem.
Yeah, I know. Yes.
Also, there are different rock layer dating methods. Rock layer positioning, like Pleistocene rock layer, which according to just stratigraphic analysis should be 1.6 million years of age. But with the rubidium strontium method, it's 773 million years old. And I've got a whole bunch of these kinds of things where the differences are 500 million years old, 20 million years old, a billion years of difference. That's what I meant, between different dating methods. Okay, well, that's a problem.
There's no way to just use stratigraphic analysis to conclude an absolute age, meaning any number of years. You would have to count varves or ice cores or involve some radioisotope. So Slick is already wrong there. And then he gave no citation for what he was referring to, but I found what I think was his reference in an article published by a shill for Answers in Genesis. There are very few actual biologists and geologists out there who have real degrees from legitimate institutions, yet favor young Earth creationism. I read one estimate that they represent less than 1% of all Earth and life scientists. In the early part of their careers, some of them were even able to demonstrate that they know what the truth is, but that for whatever reason, usually an emotional reason, always an emotional reason, usually childhood indoctrination, they prefer to make believe something else instead. So they go to work for pseudoscience propaganda mills like Answers in Genesis and the Institute for Creation Research. AIG and ICR are what creationists pretend that actual academic science institutions are, because pretenders are always trying to project their own faults onto everyone else, as if it's everyone else doing what only they are doing. And to illustrate what I mean, in order to work for AIG, they need not only your degrees to tout you as a real scientist, even though you'll likely never do any actual science again, but they also need a letter from your pastor to prove that you're a true believer too, along with some references to that effect. Then you have to sign their statement of faith, swearing an oath, promising always to support the conclusions of biblical literalism and young Earth creationism, no matter what the facts may turn out to be. They admit all this dishonest bias shamelessly on their own websites. You can look it up, see for yourself. The most common tactic they use is out-of-context quote mining, pouring through volumes of pro-evolution articles looking for one or two sentences that by themselves appear to say the opposite of what the rest of the page or paragraph did. The article I found mentioned this discrepancy in reference to an actual science article from way back in 1969, when there reportedly was a known issue specifically pertaining to rubidium and strontium. I wasn't able to access that whole article, so I can't confirm that the discrepancy is as big as Slick says, and I doubt that it was. And what I did see of the article implied otherwise. But I have spoken with a handful of scientists who do radiometric dating, and they readily admit that this was a difficult practice requiring particular understanding of some isotopes and careful controls to eliminate for impurities and so on, things that it took the industry decades to figure out. It wasn't until the second half of the 20th century that radiometric dating became reliably consistent across the board, regardless of which of several different isotopes were used, provided you understood the potential chemical influences for each one. Now, of course, we have detailed geologic maps for every part of the world based on thousands of readings taken from every testable location, wherever each geologic period is exposed. And all of these dates are corroborated by every applicable isotope in the appropriate ranges. So again, the situation is not as Matt Slick imagines or describes it.
There's also polystrate fossils. So you have trees that are fossilized through 600 million years of rock strata vertically. You can't have that.
Right.
So there's problems with this.
Oh, there's many problems with this. One is that there is not even one single example anywhere in the world that is anything even remotely close to what Slick is talking about, where any polystrate fossil grows through or otherwise connects 600 million years of strata. No, not even close. Nothing even remotely like that at all. There is a lot more wrong with this than just that. And of course, I've already addressed all this before. I did a detailed rebuttal of this claim years ago, and I'll include a link to that too, because there's a lot of information there rebutting several creationist claims about these polystrate fossils, but it'll also play you a couple clips from that relevant to what Matt Slick just said. Remember how all of this preacher's arguments are decades out of date, sometimes being disproved even before he made them? Now, this argument was already disproved decades before he was even born. It might appear by the copyright that this claim was debunked only a quarter century ago, but it was actually debunked a century and a half ago in the very first science article ever describing this phenomenon. A polystrate tree is here demonstrated by a lycopod. These plants are related to today's club mosses, and some of them do look like little teeny evergreen trees, but they are very different. And this is an extinct species that used to grow to 30 meters high, or 100 feet tall in the Carboniferous period. Some Carboniferous lycopods were as much as 50 meters high, as tall as the original Godzilla in 1954. This one has roots that have grown through what is now solidly compressed rock, but was obviously soft soil at that time, and it evidently grew near a river system, as nearly all of these upright fossils do, in which there were seasonal floods, creating numerous thin layers around the base of this plant while it continued to grow. As you can see by the illustration, this tree grew through 3 noticeably different depositional environments, implying changing conditions, where some periods were drier or wetter than others. And these type fossils can also be found with occasional deposits of volcanic ash or arid dust being blown in between recurrent periods of seasonal inundation. So it doesn't and can't come from one huge flood. Because there are different layers of mud and silt being washed up wet and drying before the next seasonal layer comes, all while the tree is still growing there to the point it becomes this wide, we know that this could not have happened in just 1 year. You can't grow a plant this big in just 1 year. This took many years. Just the layers around the base of it took many years, perhaps several decades, of alternating wet and dry depositions that can't have happened in one flood, not even a really long flood. Then when the tree died, the exposed part rotted and fell over, maybe becoming part of the surrounding coal seam, while this part was protected from erosion and got buried under further strata, implying 4 things. This took a really long time, it happened a long time ago, and it didn't happen all at once. And while many small floods are intermittently accumulating here as the tree continues to grow, it could not have grown to this level of maturity with these layers during a single giant global flood. So let's say that this swampy area eventually dries up, gets buried in wind-blown dust, and the thick deposit of pond scum starts the process of becoming fossil fuel. But the trees, at least some of them, might live through all of that. You still have rain. There's still a water table even if there's not enough for a river. And when these trees eventually die, they might be 150 feet high, but the first few meters of that can't fall over with the rest of it because they're now encased in what was once mud flows, now compacting into rock. Then that all gets filled in and buried too before the rivers eventually return and the whole process starts over again, but at a higher strata. Of course, conditions were a little different in the Carboniferous period, so named because that's where nearly all of our coal comes from. And what used to happen is that whenever a tree died and fell over, it would add to a pile of dead trees, and these would break down into smaller and smaller pieces, becoming peat and then lignite before finally being compressed into coal. So what changed all that some 300 million years ago? Scientists from the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory say there is evidence of the evolution of a fungi capable of digesting the polymer lignin, which, among other things, keeps plant cell walls rigid. So this fungus apparently ended widespread coal production.
And plus, there has to do with evolutionary stuff. And here's a big problem in evolution. It's called the Cambrian Explosion. So it's roughly 530 to 500 million years ago. The Cambrian Explosion is anywhere from 5 million to, I've seen it read as much as 35 million years as time span. So let's just pick an average of 15 million years.
An average? The fuck is he talking about? Matt Slick thinks that the Cambrian period has a variable time span between 5 million and 35 million years? No. The Cambrian period, which is the first period of the Paleozoic era, began 541 million years ago and lasted until roughly 485 million years ago. Matt Slick doesn't seem to understand that. He seems to think it began, or rather that the entirety of it happened sometime between 530 million and 500 million years ago, as if we don't really know. This is just guesswork. It's all based on, it's not based on the actual data. It's just pure speculation. So we'll just take an average of the two and call that a difference of 15 million years. Slick does not understand that the Cambrian period lasted over 50 million years, and that different moments of that 50 million year span are exposed to the surface by erosion in some specific locations in the US and Canada, China, Russia, Australia, and a couple places in Europe, as identified by index fossils of a type that only exists in that period and not at any other time. And that each of these locations were radiometrically dated, sometimes with different isotopes, which always consistently show absolute dates within that 53 million year time range. Regardless where in the world these index fossils are found, they're always confirmed to have come from within that window in time.
So imagine rock strata, that you're out there looking at a cliff face, and where you are is 700 million years ago at your eye level.
That would put you in the Cryogenian epoch, a global ice age called Snowball Earth, at a time before there was as yet any multicellular life except for parazoans like sponges.
And you look up a little bit, and then it's 500 million years, 600 million years.
At 600 million years, now we're in the Ediacaran period, where we have a few multicellular phyla, but they're all soft-bodied, no teeth or shells yet, so it usually requires pristine conditions to get any fossils at all.
And a little bit above that is 500 years. Yeah. And let's say that, we'll just say this, the 500-year mark is with the Cambrian Explosion. That's the Cambrian period begins at the 500-year mark.
No, you're already 40 million years into it by that point, and you've only got about 12 million years of the Cambrian left before it becomes the Ordovician period.
And what you see suddenly right there at the mark, not during the 15 million years, but right at the beginning, you see 40 new body types of dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs. Matt Slick thinks they were dinosaurs in the Cambrian. No, sir. At the beginning of the Cambrian period, we didn't even have vertebrates yet. What would become fish were then no more than swimming worms. You would have, by the end of the Cambrian, you would have recognizable fish, but not at the beginning. And dinosaurs didn't show up until after the end of the Paleozoic era, in the second half of the Triassic period, well over 315 million years later.
Right at the beginning, you see 40 new body types.
Phyla.
40 suddenly appear.
Yeah.
That's amazing, because there are, I think, only 35 phyla known to date. 37 if you count extinct Precambrian phyla.
Now, wait a minute. It's not that they emerged over 15 million years. It's just they're suddenly there. How do you explain that?
I explain that by pointing out that Matt Slick obviously has no idea what he's talking about, because he just got absolutely everything wrong. Most phyla appeared during the Cambrian, but not at the beginning. They were at different points therein. Another phyla didn't appear until the next period to come after that one, and a couple more phyla were already extinct before the Cambrian even began.
The Cambrian explosion is a huge problem, because it takes millions of years, they say, for speciation and phyla development. Phyla is a body type. Well, and all of a sudden, there it is.
Except that, no, it's not like that at all. What happened with the Cambrian is that after two different glaciation periods, we ended up with a time of relatively warm and calm shallow seas, providing pristine conditions for fossilization, coupled with the fact that three major lineages had developed shells or other hard parts. Not all necessarily at the beginning of that period, but at some point therein. And shells fossilize a lot easier than soft parts, especially when we're talking about small animals. And once they have shells, you can find them everywhere. But before they had shells, it's hard to ever see them. And that was Darwin's problem. Again, we've already covered all this in detail years ago, so I will give a link to that video too and play another clip.
And what we know about evolution tells us that we shouldn't expect to find much of anything prior to the evolution of bones or shells, and that whatever we do find will be trace fossils like tracks or burrows that filled in with later sediments, which we do have, by the way. Or there's those other situations, those very rare instances where even soft parts of microbes would still be identifiable. And just because they're rare doesn't mean they don't exist. And I'm not making excuses for things we haven't yet detected, because we have in fact already found exactly what we expected to find before, meaning below, Cambrian strata. Because of a combination of vastly improved understanding and continuously advancing technology, as well as the discovery of a number of treasure troves of unique fossilization events in remote locations around the world, we've learned more about paleontology just in the last couple of decades than we had in the last couple centuries prior. In fact, The earliest microfossils found so far are bacteria from 3.8 billion years ago, and fossil protists that date back to just over 1 billion years old. So biologists estimate that it took a couple billion years just to get from prokaryotes to eukaryotes, and then another billion years or so after that to get to multicellular life. And what we know about phylogenetic taxonomy, primarily from comparative genomic orthologs, indicates that during the latter billion years, the first eukaryotes in our lineage prompted a symbiotic relationship with mitochondrial bacteria, and then advanced through the taxonomic ranks of uniconts, opisticons, holozoans, philozoans, and apoicozoans, continuing through what we would now refer to as stem cells before becoming multicellular metazoans. And that's just to qualify as animals. Then, as multicellular organisms, they picked up the pace profoundly, continuing on to eventually become bilaterally symmetrical triploblastic deuterostomes. And we have fossils confirming that all of this happened before the Cambrian period had even begun. It turns out that the Cambrian was preceded by the Ediacaran period, previously known as the Vendian. Therein, paleontologists have finally found some of the evolutionary ancestors of the few Cambrian fauna that represent almost everything we still have alive today. And of course, the most primitive animals are the earliest to arrive, with sponges dating back to 580 million years, perhaps older. Then, more recently, we see precursors of modern mollusks and soft-bodied forerunners of armored chelicerates like trilobites and scorpions. So it's not true that every phyla emerged in the Cambrian, because bryozoans, like we have today, didn't appear until after that period. And trilobizoans and proarticulates were both Ediacaran phyla that not only appeared before the Cambrian, they were already extinct before the Cambrian too, a fact which serves as evidence against an intelligent designer, or at least against an infallible or omniscient one.
So these are problems, but your kids won't be hearing about these problems because they don't fit the evolutionary model. They don't fit.
Now, wait a minute. You just complained about
A big problem.
that turned out not to be a problem at all. You just don't know anything. I have a science degree in evolution. I went to school for this. They taught me this because it's important to know the history of how the understanding of science is developed, not just what was discovered. It's important that students know why this used to be an issue so many decades ago. Darwin and his contemporaries had barely any understanding of paleontology at all in the 19th century, and they had almost none of the advantages of technology that we have today. So Darwin faced a serious question once upon a time, way back when. But we have the answer now. And yes, they are teaching that to students. Science is not like religion. We don't purposefully omit or censor or refuse to talk about the embarrassing bits that don't fit, like creationists unwittingly but tacitly admit that they do. If there was something that legitimately didn't fit, scientists would be swarming all over that loudly.
And they were literally scoffed at school for some of the things that you say. I agree, and I've already, researched out. And they were literally scoffed at, which really, makes me look bad when they come home. So it's not a good thing.
If you don't want your beliefs to be ridiculed, stop believing ridiculous things. Talk to the teachers. Learn some science. Correct the error of your ways. Matt Slick can't help you with that. He doesn't know anything because creationism is just a pack of lies. That's it. That's all. There is honestly, literally nothing else to it.
So,
Yeah, and if you were to email me, I can just email you back documentation, and you can give it to them. That you take it to school. I have my notes.
Carm.org.
Yeah, info@carm.org. I have 50 pages of notes.
Okay.
50 pages of notes on this stuff.
You have 50 pages of pseudoscience propaganda that was already disproved decades ago. Conversely, I have more than 50 pages of notes disproving every one of Matt Slick's notes. I started my activism back in the days of Usenet on TalkOrigins, where we have this massive compilation of creationist claims and the refutations for each, showing how they are all just deliberately, deceptively misrepresented, misunderstood, misinformation. All the so-called science files that Matt Slick has are probably refuted here. So I'll leave a link to this below too. For example, if you look in the geology section close to the top, we see the claim that radiometric dating gives unreliable results. We see that the claim originally came from Walt Brown. Then we see the summary refutation. Independent measurements using different and independent radiometric techniques give consistent results. And there's a citation before it continues. Such results cannot be explained either by chance or by a systemic error in decay rate assumptions. And that's true. But then it goes on to say that radiometric dates are consistent with several non-radiometric dating methods. And it gives a list of examples of that as well to confirm that. And finally, the point that the creationists claim that radiometric dates are inconsistent rest on a very few examples. Creationists ignore the vast majority of radiometric dates showing consistent results. And of course, we have proof that that's true too. More specific claims will have more specific refutations with citations and the rest of the quotes included for context. For example, we can go to the paleontology section and drop down to the fossil record to see the claim that the Cambrian Explosion shows all kinds of life appearing suddenly. This claim came from Henry Morris in 1985, nearly 40 years ago, and the response is much more detailed a rebuttal than Morris's nonsense even deserved. So if you get a list of notes from Matt Slick and you take them to your school, you will soon learn that you brought a list of lies or empty assertions without any defensible basis that science has already disproved or discredited decades ago.
And it's still a file I'm
Well,
working on.
They said I guess the question they literally hit me yesterday with was, were they on the ark?
Yeah, they surely
They said
were.
that kind of laughingly at
Sure.
me. I'm like, well, I think they were. If they
Sure.
were on the earth, they were put on the ark, most likely. You
Yeah,
know,
no problem. What you can do is go to the book
maybe
of...
not a full-grown Tyrannosaurus, but maybe a baby one.
It's exactly correct.
No, that is not correct. There was never a global flood. That is a matter of certain fact. We know better than that. Again, I have a whole playlist of videos showing how several different independent fields of science all disprove the global flood of Noah's Ark.
So I've gone,
Okay,
if you
good.
go to my website and you look up, can the ark hold all the
Okay.
animals? The average size of an animal
Okay.
is something like the size of a sheep.
Yeah, but the problem is that Noah's Ark didn't have any means of steering because it didn't have any means of propulsion. And every ship that suffers engine failure in a storm loses the ability to turn itself into the waves. So the waves end up turning the ship broadside and then capsize it. And that happens to every ship carrying livestock, specifically sheep. And I've heard creationists claim that Noah's Ark could withstand waves up to 100 feet. But
How can we be sure about that? Because a wave less than half that size capsized and sunk the Gulf Livestock 1. It was 438 feet long, 4/5 the size of Noah's Ark, and it carried less than half as many animals. It had the same basic dimensions as Noah's Ark, except that it was lighter and stronger, and it was built just 20 years ago out of reinforced steel. But it was still tragically lost at sea when the unpredictable happened.
This is not the first time a livestock ship has capsized. Over the last decade, at least 6 livestock carriers have gone down. All these ships had mechanical failures. In 2009, a cargo ship carrying 82 crew members and 43,000 cattle sank close to the Lebanese coast. The ship overturned in stormy weather. It was transporting cattle from Uruguay to Syria. 39 crew members were rescued, others were presumed dead. Most of the cattle drowned in the sea. In 2015, a ship en route from Somalia to the United Arab Emirates went down in the Gulf of Aden. 29 crew members were rescued, but 2 remained missing. 3,000 animals on board perished at sea. In the same year, 5,000 cows fell into the ocean off the coast of Brazil. This occurred after a Lebanese ship docked at Vila do Conde port capsized. All the crew members were safely rescued. All the cows drowned, and many washed up on the shores of the port. In November last year, a livestock carrier with 14,000 sheep sunk near a port in Romania. All 20 Syrian crew members were rescued. Around 30 sheep were found swimming in the ocean, but most of the livestock went down with the ship. Shipping livestock on the high seas is a high-risk trade. All those on board, the crew and the animals are at the mercy of nature. be it heat, storm, or high seas.
And the
Right.
fish don't need to be on the ark.
If there really was a global flood, such as the Genesis fable describes, it would kill all the fish, both salt and freshwater varieties. It would also destroy soil horizons. There would be no way to come back from that. I doubt we would have many microbes left. You wouldn't have any vertebrates at all. It would kill everything. You might think that whales and plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs and mosasaurs and other such things might survive, but no, they would all starve to death right after all the fish were gone.
And insects can be easily stored inside of that ark in a relatively small area.
Where their lifespans would take several generations for their descendants to make it to the end of the voyage. There is no going 2 by 2 with insects, nor with arachnids or anything like that either.
And plus, I did the calculations and how many species, and I went through and did all this stuff. And let's see if I even have it here. There's something like, I think, 40% or something. It's been a long time since I wrote this. There's 40% of the space is left over. And you have all the species represented.
I read that recently that if you put 50,000 animals on the ark, it would only take up 36% of the floor space.
Right. There you go.
Nope. You still don't have enough space to carry enough food for everything, nor fresh water either, because you would have to have that. And I'll include a link to my video on carrying livestock on a ship, because it goes into detail about just how dangerous it is to try to carry thousands of animals and all the food and fresh water they need, to say nothing of how to keep the storage areas adequately ventilated so that the animals don't all die of methane poisoning, heat stress, and lack of oxygen before the voyage even gets underway.
You know, I had read that, you know, if the ark was 450 feet long and 75 feet wide
Right.
and
It's
45 feet tall, then that would be, yeah, it would be
Right.
plenty of room. So, but, you know, again, if the teachers don't reinforce that and
It
they
doesn't matter.
talk a whole different genre, I know, I feel like homeschooling now, okay? So it made me upset.
Right. It's like I found my file. Okay. There's 3,700 mammal species, 8,600 birds,
Yeah.
6,300 reptiles, 2,500 amphibians, 20,600 fish, and other marine life, 192,000. That's insects, or 850,000. That's a million
Yeah.
species. But the only ones you need on the ark are 72,000 species.
Because you're counting on them to evolve into all the species we have today, and much faster than they could evolve in real life, by the way, almost immediately, so that in a century or two, you'd have everything that we have now. So that you don't believe in macroevolution, but you do believe in a super duper, hyper caffeinated, turbocharged electro mega evolution on steroids.
The number of animals would be, I got all this math there. So you'd have 31 box cars, and I got all this stuff. You can go through, read it, and it works.
Are you sure about that? Let's check your math.
There's 3,700 mammal species, 8,600 birds,
Yeah.
6,300 reptiles, 2,500 amphibians, 20,600 fish, and other marine life, 192,000. That's insects, or 850,000. That's a million
Yeah.
species.
So, not quite a million, is it? And that's assuming that your initial numbers are correct, which I already know they're not, because you're trying to include paleofauna too, from every period of geologic history all at once. And there are more genera in the fossil record than we have alive today. What we have left alive today represents only about 1% of everything that has ever lived. So you haven't accounted for anything. All your numbers are wrong, way too low, and you can't math either.
Yeah.
Only
I'm
50.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to try to get some more information
Yeah.
to use as ammunition. So, yeah,
Right.
thank you.
But
Okay,
also,
so you agree with me, and then we agree on that that is not correct. Evolution, to me, is just so false.
oh yeah, it's false.
Yeah.
Creationism is just so false because there's absolutely no truth to it whatsoever. Every single claim that creationism makes is either unsupported and thus indefensible assertions or baseless speculation, or it's flat out factually false. There is nothing they say that is both scientifically accurate and positively indicative of their conclusion. Nothing. Nor is there anything that they say that is both scientifically accurate and a legitimate criticism of evolution either. Both of those things, they fail every test. But evolution remains a demonstrable, measurable, verifiable fact of population, genetics, fossils, and phylogeny. And yes, I can sufficiently prove both of those statements with an overwhelming preponderance of evidence beyond reasonable doubt, while Matt Slick has no defense for anything he has said or will say to this caller.
Here's something else that I got to put in my study here, my notes. I don't have it in there. The woodpecker, of all things, the woodpecker. Oh man, you bring it up to science teachers. Can you explain this in evolution? Oh, there's problems. And the woodpecker's tongue goes down its jaw by the vertebra in the neck, back up behind the head. There's a groove in the skull. It goes along the groove in the skull, up over the top of the head, down between the eyes, down in the nostril, and out the mouth. Now, plus there's a cushioning area inside the brain for the brain to handle it. There's also cushioning inside the eye sockets. And if you were to understand that the arc of the neck, the head, has to go in an arc, like a part of a circle. But that doesn't work.
Right.
What happens is that the head goes level from back to forward, which means the vertebra have to expand and contract super, super fast. The musculature has to be in place and all this stuff. Now, here's the questions. How does, just on the basic level, how does a tongue evolve getting stuck in the back of the skull and come out through the nose, the nostril, and work? Mr. Evolutionist, can you explain that?
Yeah, of course. First of all, it's obviously not a very intelligent design, is it not? The way Slick describes it anyway. I think we already agree on that. But let's go to biology, down to physiology and anatomy, and find the claim that the woodpecker tongue could not have evolved. Here we read the refutation from 20 years ago. The creationist claim stems from a mistaken understanding of the tongue anatomy. Creationists think the tongue is anchored to the nostril and grows backwards out of it. Although the back of the tongue is in some species long enough to extend into the nasal cavity, it is not anchored there. So the problem, not surprisingly, is that Matt Slick doesn't know what he's talking about. The woodpecker's tongue does not go through the nostril and then out the mouth like he said. Again, he's got everything backward.
And I've read articles where they try to explain it, and boy, do they stretch logic.
Oh, yeah, they do try to explain it based on the foraging activity of the bird, and based on its diet. It had to do that for his diet to be maintained. Isn't that? Yeah, I've heard. Yeah,
it's pretty bad. But then you got these, and how's the groove go in there? And how's the tongue get stuck in the back of the skull and it works and you can survive? It's just ridiculous.
Then let me make it even easier for you. This article, again from 20 years ago, shows how the initial structure of the avian tongue in chickens is not dissimilar from that of your standard base-level woodpeckers. In both, as is common with many birds, that the tongue is anchored to a hyoid, which is normally, just below the lower jaw, as it is in humans as well. However, it's only certain lineage of woodpeckers, not all of them, who start out with tongues of normal size and configuration, but then as they grow, the hyoid horns of that particular lineage grow too, going under and behind the head, to the top and over the head, and forward down into the nasal cavity where the sheath fuses to the nasal membrane. The tongue does not get stuck in the back of the skull like he said. It's the hyoid structure that the tongue is connected to, not the tongue itself. The tongue is still right where it always was. It hasn't been relocated or repositioned. It's just been stretched out longer because the hyoid itself is stretching out too, which it can because of the double-sided shape that it started with. It's really no more complex than drawing back the elastic on a slingshot, which is pretty close to how this tongue works. These two combined can shoot the tongue out much further than it could go before. So it's easy enough to see right here in this video how this could be the result of simple mutation during biological development that confer an advantage onto the adult birds of the affected species. See? No stretch of logic at all. Unless you want to pretend that a god exists and that it tried to rewire just the tongues of certain woodpeckers and not all of them in the crazy, wrong, and backward way that Matt Slick just described, which is not how it is at all. He just gets everything wrong.
Well, how do they want me to believe that we came from monkeys?
That's not the theory. No.
The next thing,
No. It's not the theory of evolution. We came from monkeys. It's that monkeys and humans came from the same ancient ancestor. So just got to be accurate.
Absolutely. Okay.
All right.
While that was true, in a sense, 3 or 4 decades ago, that's been corrected now, too. Carolus Linnaeus classified monkeys separate from apes, but he classified humans as apes. And some apes he classified as human. But genomic studies from, again, more than 20 years ago, 30 or 40 years ago now, have confirmed that humans are a subset of apes, and that apes are a subset of old world monkeys, themselves a subset of the broader monkey collective, that we are genetically nested deep within the taxonomic suborder Anthropoidea, also known as Simiiformes, the monkey clade. So it would be fair to ask that if we didn't come from monkeys, then why are we still monkeys? Because cladistically, morphologically, genetically, we are a subset of monkeys, and birds are a subset of dinosaurs in the same way that ducks are a subset of birds, or that lions are a subset of cats.
Now,
that's true. The hominoids. That's right. Yeah.
ooh, hominids and hominoids. Very good.
Neanderthals.
So Neanderthals, actually, I read an article years ago where they did an experiment. They took computers and they had already analyzed what people's faces would look like from children on up, so they could use them in forensics to see if they could find missing persons and things like that. Well, how would this 10-year-old look, given what they understand about, genetics and growth? All right. Somebody said, hey, what would happen if, you went out 500 years, 600 years, and they looked like Neanderthals?
Right.
So I got to find that documentation again too.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago. All right, now go to the book of Job and look in Job 41. 41 and also in 40. So read 40 and 41 and you'll see two incredible animals. One is water-based.
Leviathan and Behemoth?
Yes, but read. One is water-based, one is land-based. And it's not just like a hippopotamus. Read through and you'll...
It says his tail is like a cedar tree, it says.
No, it says the tail moveth like a cedar tree, specifically a Lebanese cedar, which is smaller and more inclined to sway in the wind than an American cedar. They'll sway in the wind the same way an elephant's tail does. I'll include a link to one more video wherein two old Earth creationists, one a medical doctor and the other a police detective, present conclusive cases for how Behemoth cannot be a sauropod dinosaur and can only be an elephant. That video is an hour and a half long, and there's an awful lot of data in it, so I'm not even going to play a clip from it. Instead, I'll play a clip from my other video that already linked on Flintstones Archaeology, wherein the book of Job describes the animal that inspired the later, embellished and stylized Leviathan. Now imagine that you're living in the Bronze Age, you're just over 5 foot tall, and you're armed with only a pointed stick and a short spear of sharpened bronze, and you are inclined or charged to take this on. The book of Job, which was written consistent with that image, describes a huge, powerful, yet graceful monster whose mouth is like a set of great doors ringed by fearsome teeth. His back has rows of shields tightly sealed together, each so close to the next that no air can pass between. They are joined fast to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. If you lay a hand on him, you will remember the struggle and never do it again. Of course, I'm quoting from the Bible here. Any hope of subduing him is false. The mere sight of him is overpowering. When he rises up, the mighty are terrified. They retreat before his thrashing. The sword that reaches him has no effect, nor does the spear, or the dart, or the javelin. Iron he treats like straw, and bronze like rotten wood. Arrows do not make him flee. Sling stones are like chaff to him. A club seems to him a piece of straw. He laughs at the rattling of the lance. His undersides are jagged potsherds, leaving a trail in the mud like a threshing sledge. He makes the depths churn like a boiling cauldron, and stirs up the sea like a pot of ointment. Behind him he leaves a glistening wake. One would think the deep had white hair. Nothing on earth is his equal, a creature without fear. And of course, I'm quoting Job again. And this is the Leviathan, described as a scaly reptilian thing with legs dragging itself through the mud. The common use of the word now is for whale, but it apparently did not actually mean that originally. And if you take out the obvious embellishments, giving it fiery breath as well, then what you have left matches this pretty well.
Yes. Read through. You go to the article I got on this. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you can go to the article and you can read the points and stuff like that, and you can see. Okay?
Yes.
All right.
I will. I definitely will. Yes.
All right.
Well, thank you so much. I feel vindicated.
Okay.
I feel vindicated by professionals.
You haven't been vindicated by professionals, lady. You've been duped by an ignoramus. You should feel embarrassed and outraged at having been lied to all your life. Why do people call into shows like this? To ask questions of some idiot who obviously has no idea what they're talking about. Oh, you got a question about dinosaurs? Ask a young Earth creationist, because then you know that every answer will be both wrong and stupid. After this, Matt Slick told her to go out and buy the book Icons of Evolution by Jonathan Wells, which is another collection of lies. I would tell her to go buy my book instead, Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism, wherein I explain what Jonathan Wells got wrong and what all these other willfully ignorant professional idiots got wrong, so that she can finally learn the truth about all this, because she is not going to get that from religious apologists. Matt Slick is demonstrably and unambiguously, flat out, factually false on absolutely every single point he tried to make on this call. There's no debating that. He can't defend himself. And everything he got wrong today was already known to be wrong decades ago. They're classic lies if they were only disproved 20 years ago. They're vintage lies if they were disproved 30 years ago. And some of what he said today are antique lies, having been disproved over a half century ago, or more than a century ago in the case of polystrate fossils. Yet Matt Slick never got the memo, and he is still repeating those lies shamelessly, even a lifetime after he could have and should have known better. But here's the important bit, though. This is what really matters. If you share this video with him or get confirmation that he's seen it, then once you know that he knows that you know that he's wrong, will he correct himself? Will he post an errata video apologizing for every error he has made here, or any of them? Will he have the integrity to accept correction and admit the actual fact in any of these cases? Or will he continue to tell all those same lies, knowing that they are lies, for another decade or so, until he dies in his fantasy and ceases to exist in reality? I think we all already know the answer to that, don't we?